All right, Brian, we are live. Thank you for joining me, my friend.
Hey, nice to see you. Happy Friday.
Likewise, happy Friday. So,
Yeah.
everybody tuning in, again, my name is Robbie Martin. I'm joined today by an awesome connection. I actually met at an event in Annapolis. We're having a couple of toddies together, watching the Blue Angels fly over for the demonstration at the Naval Academy. But I'm joined today by Senior Manager of SOC Operations at Appian, Mr. Brian Varine. Again, my background professionally, I work in the open source governance space with a company called Sonatype. This series is designed to bring you really digestible, quick content with industry thought leaders. So, Brian, I'm super excited to have you on today. So, if you want to give a quick introduction from yourself, we can get this thing rolling.
Yeah, I'm Brian Varine. Like I said, working right now, working at Appian. Been doing security operations for probably longer than I care to admit. My first real job was working for Blue Cross Blue Shield way back in 1999 after I graduated college. But I've been doing electronic warfare, SIGINT, and some type of security. It didn't really exist back then, so it was kind of ad hoc. And then we didn't call it cyber back then, and we didn't really call it security operations, more network security. So went through there, and then I came back into DoD, doing a little black world stuff. But I always liked the defensive side, so I got an opportunity to come work for the federal government, running a SOC over Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And from there, I went to run security operations at Energy, and then Department of Justice for about 5 years, which that was a real fun. Actually, all three of them have been very fun. But then I left and became a consultant and kind of stayed in the federal track. But just recently, I moved over to Appian, which is kind of a change for me, going from more the federal customer to a completely private cloud-based company. So it's been real fun, and it's kind of nice because I get to learn a lot.
Definitely. And you've had a career spanning what most people knock out in. I just to rephrase this, you spanned multiple careers where most
Yeah,
people
yeah.
are in one track and they stick with that. You've got a lot of exposure from not only public versus private, but different entity types, different purchasing decisions, different methodologies. And I know when we first connected, one of the things that you said that really stuck out that I've actually seen start getting some lip service on places like LinkedIn too is when you're looking at things from a cybersecurity perspective, the industry got to a certain point from legacy systems or on-prem systems where people are self-hosting and have a little bit more control over that. One of the things that stood out when we first started talking about the trends that you're seeing is how there's been such a rapid migration to the cloud and cloud architecture and cloud infrastructure and cloud visibility and ultimately security around it isn't quite caught up to the adoption yet. So I was curious, where do you see from a top line item perspective what you're focusing on and what other security professionals should be focusing on around cloud architecture and securing that environment?
Yeah, I think so. We were getting pretty good at security, incident response, and things like that, and detecting malware, around maybe 2014, 15, 16. But cloud was on the horizon. It existed and people were using it, but it was still kind of new. And I think one of the mistakes a lot of security operations people and a lot of executives made is that they kind of ignored cloud for a while. It was like, hey, nope, we're not going to do it, and we don't have to worry about it. And what happened is the business just moved on, and I think a lot of security operations types were left out, and I think executives just kind of believe that, hey, we've got visibility. So one of the things we're trying to focus on is getting our arms around where is our cloud, and then what we can see, because you can have a lot of great cloud engineers, great cloud architects, and good technology, but if your security operations center can't see it or doesn't know it exists, something's going to happen. You could have the best DevOps pipeline, but usually somebody's going to make a mistake somewhere. Somebody needs to be able to, catch when there's an issue, and there needs to be some kind of incident response that's coordinated throughout the environment, so that you have a cohesive, coherent response to an intrusion. A lot of times what I've seen in cloud is that the cloud team just kind of handles it, and in a lot of organizations, what I've seen is cloud is kind of treated as, hey, that's cloud, that's over there. They'll take care of it. And
it's kind of siloed off.
Yeah. And what I tell them is like, I'm a terrible cloud engineer. But usually cloud engineers are not really good at, incident response and things like that. So it's like, and it's funny because in the few times that we've integrated well with the cloud, some of the cloud guys are like, oh, you guys are going to take this load off me. And it's like, yeah, see, we can kind of help each other. And like, do you like getting called at, 2 a.m?
Sure.
So I think, you can kind of build out that trust level. But I think initially, I think a lot of, especially a lot of cloud projects are very siloed. So it's like, well, we're just going to go to the cloud for, I don't know, some payroll system, and it's that cloud and that system, and that's the cloud team for that one system. And then you might not, you might have some customer relationship management system, and it's a different cloud and a different silo, and they all operate independently, and they don't talk to each other, and they're definitely not talking to the SOC. So, kind of getting back that visibility, and that's where that comment came from. It's kind of going back 20 years because I remember, being at Blue Cross and some other places, we had a pretty good visibility of the firewall and things like that, but certain applications, it was like, hey, this is the business. It's very complex, very sophisticated. We don't want anybody in here messing things up. So you security guys stay out. So it's taken some time to get that visibility back.
Yeah. One of the things that came up with another friend of mine, John Scott, who is one of the co-founders of another open source company called Ion Channel, when we were discussing the need for increased SBOM adoption, was you can't protect what you can't see. And I think that's applicable to this conversation as well. When you mention visibility from a cloud perspective, typically that's step one. If you take that methodology of you can't protect what you can't see, we have to have an inventory first. We have to be able to take stock of our current environment and then either remediate or put guardrails in place from there. How do you go about increasing visibility in a cloud environment from an architecture perspective, one, but also from a traffic and incident response perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really more of a management type thing, because you can design a good architecture and things like that, but especially with cloud, it really comes into the management of that cloud and who's paying for it and things like that. I've seen this not just in government, but in private sector, where you'll have a company and it's like, hey, we have a marketing team and a payroll team and a product team, and I don't know, let's say you make widgets, and you're like, well, we have this widget, and they have 15 different cloud systems, and they're all independent, and they all have their own finance systems. So when you're trying to get your arms around it, you're like, hey, I need everybody to give me their cloud account information, and I need access and things like that. They're resistant to do that. So where do you go to say, okay, it's not like there's one place in the company or agency to go to say, hey, give me all the cloud accounts. It's like herding cats. And of course, you're going to have the people that are like, I'm kind of doing something I wasn't really authorized to do, or I don't want security in my stuff.
Right.
So, and that's why I always tell people that's like, I think half the reason why cloud has become so popular is because you could stand up systems without having to go through security. And then when everything was ready, you could go to security and say, hey, I built this system, now we need to work on certification.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot of that. But I mean, like I said, I've heard from really, I have people like, obviously I know from companies you heard of, and they have the same problem where they're like, we don't know where all of our cloud is. Like, hey, we've got 90% of our cloud covered, but then we've got this 10% we keep finding out about. There's one company I know where they went to finance, and finance said, if everybody that has an Amazon account, you need to use this account code. And if you're paying for it with a Visa card, we're going to stop paying for it in 90 days. And after that, it's on you. And they basically forced them to do that. The problem with that is it's really hard to get a company to do that. And if you've ever tried to get the federal government to do that, where you have, you have the parent agency, and then you have components underneath that, there's money coming in from 700 different angles. So that approach just won't work. So a lot of it is just, trying to get a hold of it. when you do the certification or, authorization and accreditation, you can try to do that. But it really takes a lot of effort, especially you have to have that one SOC guy that's constantly pressing, because even a lot of CISOs don't think about, hey, does my SOC have visibility of what I'm being briefed on?
Sure.
And I think that the natural tendency is just to assume that, yeah, they can see it. And it's like, no. And then when you get into like, hey, great, we can see your API, all the stuff going on that, but hey, we want to put network sensors in there, or we want to put some kind of container security monitoring in there. Well, then it's like, hey, now you're messing with my product and my Kubernetes, and it's highly engineered, and I don't want to do that. So it's a constant fight.
So what you're saying is everybody needs a Brian Varine on staff.
Yeah, it's hard, because I think that's one of the more difficult things about it, is that you have to continually press, and you can't, you have to be, you have to be able to talk, and you can't be a total jerk about it, because then people just blow you off. You have to explain, hey, this is why we need this, and come up with this is why we're going to help you, and some of those things. And I think if you can do that, you'll be successful. But to date, I have not seen any large organization doing cloud right. And you talk to their security ops people, and they're like, at first it's like, oh yeah, we have visibility, and then you start like, well, what about? And they're like, well, yeah, we don't really have that. So plus, if you look,
I was going to say, go ahead, Brian.
I just say, like, and when you read about a lot of threat intelligence, some of the big names, you'll read a report from them. They'll say, hey, APT, XYZ, this is a bad report. And it's always the traditional, hey, they popped a workstation, they got into Active Directory, they moved around, popped the file server, and sucked stuff out. There are very few intelligence reports or threat intel reports where it's like, hey, they compromised their Kubernetes, and because they had a vulnerable kubelet and they didn't update it, and they got in there and they maneuvered around there. Those are very rare. And you could think, well, it's either very, very secure technology, or we're just not seeing it. And so I'm in the latter. Like, no, we're just not seeing it, because everybody makes mistakes. There's vulnerabilities everywhere. So and I know that the visibility is lacking. So at that point, it's like, well, what do we do about it, right? So
sure. Well, what you just pointed out is you've seen really large cloud intensive, cloud native, so to speak, organizations not doing cloud right, so to speak. If you were to do what you're doing now, essentially in your gig, where would you start? Or if you were to take some of these large corporations and say, we're rewinding 5-10 years back to when you started this cloud migration, where would you start? What would you say is the first things to do to quote unquote do it right?
Yeah, I think you'd probably, well, first, here's the other problem with cloud security is that you can't forget to do the traditional security, the works, the EDR, NDR, all the stuff on-prem, that's not going away. So you should be, so when you start talking about these things, it's like, well, where's my EDR and my NDR? It's like, gosh, that's a lot of money. And then you come to the table and you're like, oh, and by the way, I need cloud. I need cloud security. And they're like, man, I just spent, millions of dollars on all this other stuff. And how I explained it at my last federal agency was like, hey, you just had me open up 4 new data centers, right? Amazon Gov Cloud, Azure Gov. So those are 4 different, pretty much data centers, and they don't come with any firewalls or things like that. You have to build that in there. And so when you start factoring in, cloud engineering or, security engineering and some of the tooling and stuff like that, it gets into their equation. Like, well, gosh, I thought this was going to be so much cheaper. I advertised to whoever that this was going to be cheap, and now you're coming to me, but you have to explain it to them. And a lot of them, they don't want to hear it. So I think, but I think you have to get visibility of those accounts. Somehow you have to know where that stuff is. I mean, I used to get called at my last agency, the CIO used to ask, where's my data? Right. And, he would make very pointed questions at people, and they were like, well, it's in Amazon. And so that's not a very, it's not a question that gives you a lot of confidence. And so, and so they would they would say, oh, well, the SOC's got it. And then, or, hey, don't worry about it, Microsoft or Amazon's got it. It's like, no, they don't.
Yeah.
So it's things like that. And the other thing is, how much encryption are you using and things like that. So it's really hard to do. And it's hard to move to the cloud. It's even harder to secure it.
Do you think there's an assumption when you're moving to the cloud that there are natively out of the box more security tooling than there is when you're looking at something like an Azure, a Google Cloud, or an AWS?
Yeah, I think there's certainly, there's a ton of controls, and I think people mix up controls with detection. So, Amazon, Azure, you can really get really granular in the permissions that you set up. But I think we're starting to face some things now. The other thing, like a lot of auditors haven't even gotten into cloud. So when you get audited, they come in and they're auditing your on-prem stuff. Nobody's actually
Sure.
going and saying, well, let's audit our IAM policies and see who's got overly permissive, IAM policies, and how could we pare that down? Just like we did 20 years ago when everybody was in Active Directory and everybody ran as domain admin. And after a while, people are like, well, maybe everybody shouldn't be running as admin. And we came up with roles and things like that. So I think, we're still struggling with that where, I used to like auditors because they would come in and validate, hey, what this guy's telling you is true. You guys are doing all this stuff wrong, or you could do it more securely. And, now you'll see an auditor come in and, like I said, they're still focused on-prem. They're not really going out to the cloud and saying, hey guys, you need to do this or do that, or you're missing these accounts, or this environment over there isn't being seen. So
right.
It takes an effort too, because a lot of the SOC training and a lot of the SOC analysts, they're still focused on desktop servers, network traffic. I could, when I was at my last federal agency, I remember we started doing some cloud monitoring things, and we would send tickets out to a component saying, hey, you have an open S3 bucket or an open security room. And they didn't even know, like they did not understand how to respond. They didn't really understand what we were telling them. So, because they were, they'd be working with a contractor or something like that. So we'd have to get on the phone with the contractor and be like, hey, this is what this means.
Yeah.
So, and it was hard for our guys because they were learning it on the fly too. So, yeah, it's all new technology. It's cool because you get to learn a lot, but at the same time, you're learning. It's like changing the tire when you're still moving.
Sure. I mean, it's a new frontier still in a lot of ways. And I know you mentioned last time we spoke too, that a lot of your hires within cloud security are kind of the next wave of engineers in the first place. So they're kind of cloud native by instruction. But on the flip side, you have a tougher time driving home that message and adopting that cloud security message with more legacy minded executives or more legacy engineers. So I think that plays a piece of it too. I'm sure there's some give and take between a new generation of engineers that just live and breathe this environment because it's what they grew up in versus folks that are trying to adopt a new methodology, so to speak.
Yeah, it's hard, especially with the federal government trying to get people right. The pay is not as good usually. So I'm trying to recruit the best and the brightest. And then, where I'm at now, they're able to, they're pretty nimble. They're able to get guys, their HR moves really quick. They're able to hire guys right out of college or before college.
Shout out Appian HR.
Yeah. So, but with, federal government was, 9-month hiring process. So a lot of times it was like, hey, I got this guy, he's really good. And it's like, well, maybe in 9 months. And then, at month 7, the guy would say, I'll find another job.
I got something
so there's
else
definitely
going.
A lot of that. The guys I have now, it's really funny because they're really young. So, but they're super smart. So it's kind of cool. But a lot of times I'll say something or do something and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. These guys weren't around for some of this stuff. So, yeah, but it's good because, I think a lot of especially the younger guys, they've never really known their career. They've always had cloud in their career. So it's not something overwhelming for them. I think with a lot of guys, especially, my age, it's like, hey, here's my desktop, my server, my big firewall. And I think a lot of people, especially, that have been in it a while, it's like, I'm not dealing with that cloud stuff. I'm just going to say, no, you can't do it. Well, it doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means they're not going to tell you about it. So, Yeah, it's interesting.
Definitely. Well, Brian, tons of awesome insights, and I'm looking forward to listening back to this one myself and going back through all the nuggets. But thank you so much for joining me. Really
Yeah.
topical, really timely, and a lot of great nuggets shared. So thank you. And Brian Varine from Appian, thank you so much for joining.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.